Why does Fall Guys have a battle pass?
Well, I don't know. I don't play Fall Guys. Hey everyone, this is Pete. And recently, my friend Chris shared a video with me that first appeared about 2 months ago at the time of recording. It's simply called Modern Gaming, and is from a channel known as Self-Deficient. The video picked up 1.7 million views in the 2 months since its release, and probably has even more if you go check it now, making it a runaway success for Self-Deficient, a new channel with just 3 videos to his name. The vast majority of those views are from people who think he had a very good point, as can be seen from the multitude of people who took the time to comment in support of what he was saying. Hell, even I'm in there, agreeing broadly with pretty much everything that was said. It's a good video, and I recommend watching it. Link in the description. However, Self-Deficient would be the first to note that the video is primarily intended to be an exaggerated comedic rant, and as such he deliberately omitted a lot of things. So I thought it might be interesting to explore some of those things that he omitted, not as a means of taking down his video or arguing against it, but rather to reassure those who might be feeling a touch bitter and jaded that things aren't quite as bad as they might seem. I mean, don't get me wrong, things are definitely bad in the big budget AAA space, and I don't think they're sustainable, to such a degree that I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of crash in the coming years. Although that said, I've been saying the same thing for about a decade at this point. But that doesn't mean that gaming as a whole is dying. In fact, it's thriving. And many of the things that people are most angry and cynical about with what they deem modern gaming, and by that they mean the modern AAA gaming sector, are in fact signs that gaming as a creative medium has matured. We've reached a point where it's neither practical nor desirable to play every single game that has been released, where there's a marked distinction between the blockbuster and the title that has been designed for a specific rather than a broad audience. One might argue it's never been practical or desirable to play everything, given the sheer number of games that are available across every platform throughout history, right from the Atari 2600 onwards. Even consoles with relatively small complete libraries like the Nintendo 64, which has just under 400 games compared to more than 3,000 on its contemporary, the PS1, would take a while for you to play every game available. And I bet you wouldn't want to play every game available anyway, since there are doubtless types of games that you don't personally get along with. But the fact stands, something has changed. Whereas once it was desirable for your average gamer to pick up at the very least every big name release that scored 90 or more on Metacritic, nowadays it pays to be selective. Very selective. Because what I mean when I say gaming has matured is that it's reached a similar point to other forms of creative media, such as books, movies, comics and music, and at a much more rapid rate. No one expects a movie buff to watch every single movie, because there are movies they know they won't enjoy, and why would you waste your time subjecting yourself to something you know in advance you won't like? No one who enjoys reading picks up every single book that is ever released, because every reader has their own favourite subject matter or authors, to say nothing of the fiction-non-fiction divide. And there is no one person who cites listening to music as one of their interests who is into absolutely every genre of music that ever existed. We're at that stage with gaming now. It's not enough to just be a gamer anymore, and that's good. It means that you can specialise in particular areas that capture your interest and focus on those, while deliberately excluding things you know you won't enjoy. The fact that it's possible to do this and still keep yourself entertained on a daily basis is the main sign that gaming is mature as a medium. Partway through the 7th generation of video games consoles, that's the Xbox 360, PS3 and Wii for those unsure, I was playing Gears of War, and I wasn't sure I was enjoying it. Sure, it was technically impressive, but I just wasn't having fun. Eventually I reached a point where I couldn't progress, and was just repeating the same sequence over and over and over again. That was the exact moment I realised, I don't have to put up with this, so I'm not going to. So I took the disc out of the drive, popped it in the box, and set it aside to trade in on my next trip to CEX in town. Not long afterwards, Some lengthy discussions with a friend online gave me a mile-long list of PS2 and PS3 RPGs to check out. And these were games that I completely missed out on back when they first came out, primarily because they'd either reviewed poorly or simply hadn't had any mainstream press attention at all. I picked up those games, and you know what? Suddenly, I felt my interest in gaming had been completely refreshed and renewed. I felt like I discovered an entirely new world, one where there were games that existed which felt like they'd been designed specifically for me and the things I enjoy. It didn't matter that mainstream reviewers hadn't liked these games, because I liked them. I was having a good time with them, and ultimately, that's all that matters. Are you having a good time? If so, great. If not, do something about it. I've never looked back since that time, and I feel like I've continued to have an immensely satisfying experience with gaming. My collection has expanded to such a degree that it pretty much fills a room in my house and then some. And while I haven't yet got to playing each and every one of those games that occupy my shelves, I know all of them are games I will definitely have a good time with when I do eventually get to them. This is why I can never get too upset anytime the gaming is dead argument comes around, and believe me, it's come around quite a few times in the last several years. Indeed, it's been knocking around in one form or another since people were complaining about bald Space Marines and brown graphics in the 7th generation at least, and it's simply not true. No more today than it was back then. What most commentators mean when they say gaming is dead is actually AAA gaming is a mess, and I hate the rampant monetization that goes on with the games that are most successful, with a side of technological progression has slowed right down over the course of the last 3 console generations, so it's been a long time since a video game came out that I found genuinely awe-inspiring. Gaming is dead is obviously a lot more catchy. All of that is true. I don't play most AAA games that are released these days because I'm of the opinion that a lot of them were released overpriced, unfinished, filled with ways to extract money from you beyond the initial asking price, and cynically designed in a similar fashion to mobile games and social media apps to keep you mindlessly engaged rather than actually having a genuinely enjoyable experience. I've never played a game with a battle pass because I have no desire to play a game that makes simply engaging with it feel like work, and I've sworn off most free-to-play and gacha titles for similar reasons, no matter how popular they might be. You may not agree with that, and that's fine. Outside of situations like this, where I'm explicitly explaining why I don't play certain games, and I will add that there are of course the odd exceptions to what I'm talking about, I don't make a point about shouting about my feelings on the subject, because they don't really matter to anyone other than me. These games clearly have an audience, otherwise they wouldn't exist and continue to be successful, and that audience is very obviously not me. And that too is fine. While I can understand the frustration at feeling like you've been excluded from something, a better way of dealing with the situation than being pissed off is to go, well, this obviously isn't for me, so what is? Because frankly, I defy anyone who has ever had an interest in video games to say that there is nothing out there that they can play and enjoy today. If you can't find anything to play at all among all the titles that are available just for current platforms, you're not looking hard enough. And if you take readily available platforms from previous generations into account, you're definitely not looking hard enough. Let's take me as an example, because frankly I'm sitting right here and it's easier than going to ask anyone else. I like role-playing games. Specifically, I like console-style role-playing games. Those with predefined characters, strong but linear storylines, and typically a wealth of side activities to optionally participate in along the way to enrich your experience. You'll notice I'm specifically avoiding calling these JRPGs for reasons my aforementioned friend Chris and I once discussed in great detail on a Moe Gamer podcast, but most folks out there would probably refer to this sort of game as a JRPG due to the fact that Japanese developers have, over the years, proven themselves to be the absolute masters of this specific format of game. JRPG is a genre that has been declared dead by the games press more times than I'd care to count, and every time it's come up it's been complete bollocks. What every single one of those articles boils down to is either there hasn't been a Final Fantasy for a while, or there are more games released on a weekly basis now than ever before, so when a good RPG does come out for consoles I don't notice it. That latter point ties into what I mentioned before about gaming being a mature medium. While back in the PS1 era, the release of a new RPG was, in most cases, something to be celebrated and a relatively noteworthy event in the annual release calendar for a platform, these days it's quite feasible to say that if you're not paying attention to the specific channels that are catering to fans of RPGs, you'll miss them completely. But they're there, and they always have been. And dear Lord, there's a lot of them that I still haven't gotten around to. And this is an important thing to take note of, I think. The current games press is inadequate for what gaming has become. It hasn't kept pace with the way the medium has evolved. So much so that we're now at the point where some sites are resorting to AI-generated drivel to pad out their daily schedules, just so they can at least look like they're covering even a tenth of what is released on a weekly basis. It's no surprise that some games get completely lost unless you hear about them through word of mouth or direct from the publisher themselves, because even the biggest, most prolific games press sites out there are woefully ill-equipped to cover absolutely everything. What we need, hell, I'd argue what we need if we're near on a decade at this point, is specialist coverage. We need games press sites that focus specifically on niches. We need sports game websites, competitive multiplayer first-person shooter websites, RPG websites, visual novel websites, the works. At present, these sites exist, but primarily only in the enthusiast space. We're yet to see a large-scale commercial site that focuses specifically on an individual niche in the same way that we have, say, soccer websites in the sports sector, but I'm pretty sure we're now at a point where one could be successful. Particularly now we've finally gotten people online to be willing to part with cash when it comes to their favourite content creators. And I hate that term, but let's not get into that right now. Couple that with the fact that people fucking hate ads, I feel like a subscription-based site with a focus on, say, RPGs or visual novels could really work with the right team. Someone just needs to take that bold first step, with financial backing to get things up and running while they establish an audience who is willing to support the initiative over the long term. But right now, we don't have that. And that's why it can sometimes feel like gaming is dying. The mainstream games press is obligated to cover the things that bring in the clicks and thus ad revenue. These days, that tends to mean one of two things. One, cover something that there is a lot of interest in online, which means the big name, big budget, or at least popular releases of the hour, regardless of whether or not they're actually any good. Or two, write something so contentious that you enrage a significant proportion of the gamer subculture to such a degree that they simply can't resist clicking on your page to write you an abusive comment. This is why we have websites penning out their content with daily Wordle spoilers and individual articles telling you how to solve each The Legend of Zelda shrine or Super Mario level. This is why we have the review in progress. This is why we have news stories covering every time Todd Howard farts or Genshin Impact's gacha banner changes or Hideki Kamiya blocks someone on Twitter. And why the opinion piece carefully crafted to make you feel like a garbage human being for being even tangentially associated with the games industry continues to thrive. Although these sites are obviously getting the clicks, otherwise they wouldn't keep doing this, they're doing the entire medium a disservice. They make things seem worse than they actually are. They make it seem like the AAA sector, and whatever the indie darling of the hour might be, is the be-all and end-all of gaming, and it's simply not true. I'll give another couple of recent examples from my own experience. A little while back, I decided that it was time to finally try and get up to date on the Yakuza series, or Like a Dragon as it's known now. So I settled down and I started playing Yakuza 0, then Kiwami, then Kiwami 2, and a few days back at the time of recording, I finished the remastered version of Yakuza 3. Like a Dragon, has had its ups and downs popularity-wise over the years, but it's hard to deny that these are games which, at the time of their original release, have always had strong production values. They are, in essence, AAA games. And yet, for some reason, they're not treated like AAA games, even today, now the series has arguably attained mainstream success post-Yakuza 0. They might get some enthusiastic news stories and previews in the run-up to release, and probably a glowing review, but once they're out there, that will tend to be the end of it. Which is strange, because they are in many ways the absolute antithesis to the things that people typically complain about with Western developed AAA titles, and thus you'd think they should be something that is celebrated and held up as a shining example of how to do it right. But they're not, for some unfathomable reason, that I hope is not just because they're Japanese. An entry in the Like a Dragon series, if you're unfamiliar, is typically presented as an open-world adventure that unfolds in a relatively small geographical area, in which there's a linear main narrative to follow and vast swathes of side activities to distract you from said main narrative. For many folks, the side activities are the main reason to play the Like a Dragon games, and it's hard to argue with that. Each game features an incredibly well realised set of minigames that run the gamut from authentic emulated versions of classic Sega games to well-crafted virtual darts, pool, golf, mahjong and shogi games via dating sim elements, humorous abstract representations of erotic encounters and all manner of other silliness. It's not an exaggeration to say that you could lock someone in a room with a single Like a Dragon game for a month and they could come out feeling like they've had a well-balanced gaming experience. Crucially, none of these side activities feel like panning in the same way that the icons littering a map in a Ubisoft game do. They're all there in service of making the game world feel more immersive, like a setting you actually care about. Ultimately, this helps the narrative aspect of the game considerably, by providing a formidable sense of context to everything that you do. And while each game does have a completion list that encourages you to methodically tick things off in pursuit of that elusive 100% rating, at no point does the game make you feel like you're having a lesser experience for choosing not to engage with an activity you don't enjoy or that you're not good at. I've averaged about 66% completion on all the Yakuza games I've played through so far, and I'm perfectly happy with that. Not once does a Like a Dragon game demand that you shell out for microtransactions or even DLC. They're complete self-contained experiences that will keep you busy for anywhere between 20 and several hundred hours, and at no point will you find yourself experiencing the AAA fatigue you'll feel just a few hours into a new Far Cry or, God forbid, EA Sports title. Final Fantasy XVI is another great example. This is a massive game with absolutely incredible production values. And more than that, it's well crafted, worked perfectly on launch, and at no point demanded that you pay any more money than the initial price of admission. It also featured a well written, beautifully told story that managed to completely go over the head of a significant proportion of mainstream video game reviewers, but that's something to get into another day. Point is, it was another AAA game that was the antithesis to all the things that people dislike about the great boogeyman that is the Western developed AAA title, and that consequently didn't get treated by press or public alike in the same way as a typical AAA game. I haven't seen anyone so much as mention it since it launched, despite it being one of the few solid reasons to actually bother picking up a PlayStation 5. Although I will note that several members of the VTuber group HoloLive English have been playing it recently, so that's something at least. All this makes me wonder why we focus so much on the negative. The negative exists, sure, and it should quite rightly be criticised, but to make out that gaming is dying or dead because of those negative aspects is hyperbole at best, because they don't represent the entirety of the industry or the medium. I recognise that Self-Deficient's video that we kicked off this whole discussion with was intended to be at least partly tongue-in-cheek, but the points he makes are things that other people have said about today's games industry with all seriousness. Quite rightly, in many cases, as I say. But I'd also argue that a more productive means of handling the situation would be to reward and lift up the games developers and publishers who are doing things right, rather than simply yelling into the void about things that are unlikely to change in the near future while the money keeps rolling in. As the saying goes, vote with your wallet. Pick up the games that you know, or at least think, you'll enjoy. Not ones that you think you should grab based on popular opinion or commercial success, only to end up just ranting about them out of spite. We're at least partly in this situation because people keep throwing money at things they supposedly hate. So stop paying up for things you don't like, find the things you love and reward those instead. You'll have a much more rewarding, enriching experience from this mature creative medium as a result. And if everyone does this, over time, things will gradually get better. Why does Fall Guys have a battle pass? I don't know, and I don't care. I'm not going to play it either way. I have literally over 1,000 other games on my shelves that I'd rather spend my time with. On that note, I think I'm off to make a start on Yakuza 4. And so it just remains for me to say, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.